Welcome to Walk Talk, the Faith in Motion podcast, where two regular guys talk about their walk with Christ. We're not pastors, we're not priests, just passionate followers of Jesus, here to give an account of the hope that lies within us. We don't shy away from the tough topics or the challenging scriptures. We just share our faith, and we hope that you find it helpful. We're your hosts, Randy Dupree and PJ Verdon. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, brother, here we are again.
Yes, sir. Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. So I think we've alluded to this episode a few times in some of our previous episodes. But today I think we're going to talk about Christian media.
Absolutely. Christian content, movies, music, the whole nine.
Everything's on the table. Movies, music, television, anything that might be labeled Christian media is up for discussion today.
All right. So where do you want to start? I know you kind of got a bone to pick with this space, so maybe I'll let you kick it off.
Well, yeah, I do have a bone to pick, and I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on this whole concept because the long and the short of it is there's some things I like a lot and some things I don't like a whole heck of a lot more than I like. So, yeah, so we should probably start by just defining what we mean by Christian media just to make sure we're all on the same page. So, um, I guess I'll go first here. So for me, when I'm thinking of Christian media, I'm thinking of stuff that is like really overtly like marketed towards Christians. So it's either got like a Christian label on it, like Christian music, Christian hip hop, right? That's an easy one. That's something we're very familiar with. Worship music, stuff like that, where it's like overtly marketed towards Christians or Christian movies that are, in my mind, those are movies like you're going to find made by Angel Studios,
Right.
or, you could do a quick, easy Google search and find, a list of Christian films that are advertised and marketed and usually have a very limited production run in theaters and things like that because of it. I don't know if I could really come up with a solid definition off the top of my head, but I think it's more of something I know when I see more than I could really define in words.
Yeah, and I think with that being said, I mean, even without necessarily defining it, I think most people would kind of agree that they kind of have an idea of like this is more geared toward a Christian or faith-based audience than other things.
Yeah.
And I mean, realistically, we've kind of seen an increase, I feel like, as of late, uh, kind of in that lane, with even I guess the main one that pops to mind is that animated, David that came out not too long ago. I mean, to hit theaters. I mean, I really don't remember anything necessarily along those lines very recently. Well, at least not in I guess Prince of Egypt as far as cartoon would be concerned, but then I have some issues
Well,
there.
well, let's talk about Prince of Egypt. I think that's interesting you bring that one up because um I don't know if I would necessarily categorize that as a Christian movie. I don't
Well,
know.
but I mean, think about it. At one point in time, did you not? Because I know I did. I was like, oh man, like it was crazy because I even wanted to show it to my kids because I grew up watching it. And I
Yeah,
was like, hey, let's check this out. And then I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, this is not as biblically sound as I
right.
necessarily remember. So it was kind of, I mean, and that's, and I'll be honest with you. For me personally, that's my biggest issue. It's like I've seen like whenever you do get these big productions, like so there Noah, the story of Noah with Russell Crowe
Yeah,
deviates so far off from the Bible. And,
right.
and in my
Right.
opinion, I'm like, why are you going to take a story specifically from the Bible and not remain accurate to that story? You know what I mean? It's like that kind of stuff aggravates me to an
Yeah,
extent.
yeah.
And I feel like Prince of Egypt did that also.
So I think so. What we're kind of working our way around a definition here, but I think for me, one of the important qualities of a so-called Christian movie, if we're going to just talk about movies for a second, I think we'd have to say it was made by like a Christian studio. Because if you think about the Prince of Egypt, and I'm doing some research here on the side, that was DreamWorks, which
Right.
DreamWorks has done all sorts of stuff.
Oh
If you
yeah.
look at the even going back to the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, that was Paramount, Pictures, right? And so you have all these other studios out there that might be making, content that's based on biblical stories and narratives, but I don't know if I would necessarily categorize that as Christian movies because of the fact that they're made by these other studios. In my mind, when I'm thinking more of Christian movies, I'm thinking of, like, the overtly Christian studios like Angel.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that hasn't been around until recently.
You're
You know,
right.
back in the day, I mean, everybody did a little bit of everything. There was, something for everyone kind of mentality. And I mean, I guess in that same mentality, would you say, that like that I guess like Passion of the Christ, I know that's one that you really like. Would you say that that's a Catholic movie because it was made, by what
Yeah.
what's his name?
Yeah.
And he's a devout Catholic. I wouldn't go that far. You know what I mean? Mel Gibson. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
he's I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good question because and that one was independent, right? That one was, Mel Gibson. He produced that one independently. I don't even know what studio that would have been through. Let me look it up real quick.
I don't necessarily remember like seeing it.
Let's see here. So Passion of the Christ, thinking. Icon Productions, the independent studio owned by Mel Gibson. So that one's an indie film. So yeah, I guess it makes it a little bit hard to define in terms of movies because it seems like you have this category where when we're talking about certain movies, we have we have some studios like DreamWorks and Paramount, and even this independent one, Icon Productions, that Mel Gibson owns, that does what you could consider secular as well as
Yeah,
Christian movies.
right.
And then you have other studios like Angel, and I don't know if Angel had any predecessors that did strictly Christian films. But then you have that whole category, that whole genre itself, where it's explicitly just Christian, and in my opinion, it's mostly like Christian themed stories that are marketed to Christian people. I don't see most of the movies that are coming out of, things like Angel or like the explicitly Christian only studios as being marketed for everybody.
You know what? Just popped into my mind. I remember, back in the good old days, whenever I was in school, and they'd wheel that that TV in there, you know what I mean, on the shelf and stuff like that, and you'd watch movies, so you kind of knew you'd have like a lax day. But I remember what pops into mind is they had a movie uh back then that they watched, and I loved it. It was called the Buttercream Gang, and
That sounds familiar to me. I don't know.
yeah.
Remind me, what was it about? I'm sure I've
So,
seen it.
it was about 2 best friends, or it was about this little clique, the Buttercream Gang, and they were
Hmm.
helping people and stuff like that, and Pete, one of the best friends, moves away to the city and gets introduced into a gang, and he comes back, and he starts a gang, and then him and his buddies, his old best friends, are, like, butting heads, but it's very, like, I remember being like, "Oh, this is so edgy," like, Pete's just this bad guy, and he's like, it was very cheesy, but so I think that there were studios out there that made those kind of movies, and obviously, I think just in general, I guess I'm talking about like the '80s, early '90s. At this
Yeah,
point, like the whole culture was a lot different. The things that were acceptable compared to the things that are acceptable now are like night and day.
yeah, yeah.
So I don't know if that plays an
Well,
effect, or there were actually legitimately people trying to make that kind of content.
I guess this is helping me to further like entrench my definition at least of what I'm going to call Christian media. And I'm going to say that it's media made by Christians for Christians. And I would
Uh,
say coming from an exclusively Christian production studio or, record company or publisher of some sort. Like I think that's going to have to be my definition because I'm going to say in my opinion movies that were made that were just more wholesome or maybe had a more positive message that came from a studio that did, a variety of different genres, I'm not gonna classify that in my mind as Christian, even though in some instances, the message behind it is probably better than a
right.
lot of overtly Christian movies.
Hey, maybe you could jog my memory. Wasn't there a like a store that specifically only sold like, you know, religious stuff, like Christian-based stuff,
Oh,
I guess.
yeah, there's all
Well,
sorts
I
of
can't
them.
I can't remember, like, but there was a specific place I wanna say in Pueblo we used to go, like, remember, like,
Yeah,
if
there
you wanted
was
to buy,
the
like, a
greatest
book,
yeah, Greatest Gift and Scripture Supply in
Scripture
Pueblo
Supply, that's what I was thinking of,
was
Scripture
one of
Supply.
them. I know there's, like, Catholic, supply stores as well.
Right, right.
What's the real big chain? There's a real big chain that we used to go to in Colorado Springs. Ooh, I can't think of it. Oh, but yeah, but yeah, it was like, stores that pretty much only sold Christian movies, Christian TV shows, Christian
Right.
books.
You wouldn't
Eh
find anything secular in
exactly.
there, yeah,
It was a
yeah,
safe place to go shopping with your kids, and anything they picked out, like, you knew there wasn't gonna be any profanity or nudity or anything negative in it. It was gonna be, very positive.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I guess, for me, I'm gonna stick to that definition, man. I'm gonna stick to definition that, in my mind, what I'm calling Christian media is Christian made content targeted towards a Christian audience, produced or distributed by, exclusively Christian producer.
Okay.
So, like, Angel Studios is my example because that's all they do. They're not doing, Toy Story one week and, um what do you call it? Jesus, I can't think. The Prince of Egypt.
Yeah,
They're not doing Toy Story one week and Prince of Egypt the next week, right? They're just literally just, sticking with that one channel.
yeah. And you know, there are, like I said, it is more or less evolving as far as, I guess that opening up that lane. I mean, there's different things out there now.
Yeah.
And there's one that I saw. I don't think it's Angel. I can't remember what it is, but basically, I guess like the principle behind it is like you can take any movie and filter it through this site, and it like removes like anything that's not family friendly.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know what you're talking
I
about.
can't remember what that one's
But
called.
that's a little different though, because that you play regular movies through it, regular
Correct.
secular films, and it basically gives you a TV edited version on
Yes.
the other side of it. Yeah, it cuts out all the negative stuff.
Yeah,
I forget what that one's called, but that's a whole 'nother, I think a whole other topic.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about music for a second because I think for me, I don't really have a problem with most Christian music because I like having different genres and knowing exactly what I'm getting. For example, if I'm going to listen to Christian hip hop, I know it's going to be hip hop. I know it's going to be, mostly positive lyrics about Christ or about people's struggles and how they overcame them. I don't have an issue with any of it. I mean, I think that, there's worship music that I think personally I could hear doctrine behind some of the worship music that I might not 100% agree with, and that's probably my biggest qualm with any kind of Christian music is that sometimes there's denominational beliefs and doctrines that might
Undertones.
come out.
Yeah.
Say that again.
I said doctrinal undertones. That
Yeah,
kind of.
it's got some undertones in some of it, which okay, it's like, I'm very open-handed with things like that. So, but I've heard stories of people who, refused to sing a song in church because it said
Man.
things that they disagreed with. And,
Yeah.
I could respect that.
Yeah, I've heard stories, and that's it's a wild thing. You know what I mean? It's like, man, you
Yeah,
know, it's not everybody's at the same place. You know what I mean? Not everybody
right.
views everything through the same lens. I will tell you, I guess I do have kind of a qualm with some, um, I guess, Christian music, and it's not a big deal. I mean, I can tell you right now, there's one person that pops into my head just automatically, thinking about this, and it's a singer called his name is Blessin' 04, I believe. And man, I was introduced to him because I heard this song, "Your Love" by him, and it's a beautiful song. Like I think I mentioned before, like I was on my way home from work listening to it, and it just broke me down.
Yeah,
And so I was very, I was like, man, I like this guy. I want to see what else he got. So I kind of looked into some of his music, and matter of fact, he has another song right now out on K Love that plays, and to be honest with you, I don't even remember what the name of it is, and it's because of this. So I guess I heard Your Love, and he says, stars will fall from the sky one day. but when I'm lost, I'll call your name to keep me right in the middle of your love. And and so, that was my introduction. Well, this second song that I heard, I noticed that he never mentions God. You know what I mean? He
Mm,
kind of flirts around with these ideas of
right,
Christian themes, but he never just comes out and is like, God, I'm Jesus, I'm talking to you. And so that's
right, right,
if I had to say, I'm like, man, like, fully commit, like, come out.
right,
And
right.
it's almost like you're on this line of being like, man, I want to be relatable to everybody. And it's like, man, no, you know what I mean? Heck with the
Yeah.
world. Sing to God. You know what I mean? I guess if you're gonna do it, if you're gonna be in that space, then be in that space. You know what I mean?
Hey, friends, I just want to tell you about my book, Everyday Lean. After 25 years of leading continuous improvement projects in the manufacturing world, I came to a simple realization. Lean applies to any process because every process has waste. Whether you're baking a cake, developing software, or building an F 15, the same principles apply. Everyday Lean gives language and structure to what you're likely already doing. It's all about helping people and organizations make their work better every day. Everyday Lean is available now on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. Well, let me just come out against you a little bit and push back a little bit on that one. And I'm going to say you're wrong, but I don't really mean you're wrong. I just mean I disagree a little bit, because I would say that there are artists that I would say are not as explicit, but I've heard them and I'm like, wait a second, what did they just say? And it was almost like they were what's the term they use today? Dog whistle. It was almost like it was a dog whistle that me as a Christian, I was like, oh, this guy's a Christian
I never
singing
heard
this
that
song.
before, but that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, for example, I will tell you, years ago, I was walking in a Hastings. Remember Hastings? It's
Yeah,
a,
yeah,
bookstore, media store, everything store, but it wasn't just Christian store. It was like, you know, everything, right? You could buy
right.
books,
Melting pot.
movies, yeah, melting pot, everything. They
Yeah.
even sold like collectibles, like, figurines and things
Right,
like
right.
that. And I remember hearing a Lifehouse song as I was walking through. Never heard of Lifehouse, never knew who this was. I just heard the song, and some of the lyrics stood out to me because I was like, this sounds like it's Christian, but I never heard them say Jesus. I never heard them say God. And honestly, like I went home and I Googled some of the lyrics, and that's how I found out who it was because I Googled the lyrics and then I found them. And so I started listening to them and I became a huge fan. And most of their songs, and I think this is a criticism that you might agree with that I've heard a lot of Christians talk about with bands like Lifehouse, is if you didn't know they were talking about God, you could almost think they were just a love song. And it's kind of ambiguous like that, which honestly I don't really have a personal issue with. I kind of think that that's okay. To me, like it doesn't always have to be as overt or as explicit, but I think there are times when I do want it to be, like worship music, for example. I would prefer that it's more overt and explicit. And when I'm listening to like some rock or some pop or even some hip hop, I'm okay if it's not.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I get it, and like I said, I'm not just because I love Lifehouse still to this day. No Name Face album is a classic in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah.
I love pretty much every song on that album. And man, like I said, I'm just saying. I guess if I had to pick something, and that's because I guess like for me, I just and don't get me wrong, I agree there is a place for that kind of thing. It's like like an introduction, right? To at least just some kind of positive, reinforcement on if you will. But like it would be like, like calling this the Walk Talk Faith in Motion podcast and then anytime we're talking about scripture, we're like and that guy in there who did that thing. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah, I get your
you know what I
sentiment.
mean?
I think that's a little extreme, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I'm just saying like it just to me it's like man just like and look, I
We're
guess
very overt with our podcast, calling it Walk Talk Faith in Motion. If we called it like two brothers having a conversation, and sometimes we just talked about, life and raising kids, and sometimes we talked about work, and sometimes we talked about scriptures, that'd be a little different.
yeah, but no, I guess like for like with Lifehouse, like you had to kind of go deep dive into
I I
to
did.
to but I'm saying to know that where they were coming from. And I guess even in that way, it's like, okay, listen, you know what? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a Christian guy and I make music and this is the tone of my heart. And, I might not say it, but just, kind of, I don't know. I don't know. I guess it flirts with a line of to me feeling like, are you ashamed to
Well, let me
proclaim the
ask
name
you
of Jesus?
this.
I'm sorry.
Let me ask you this because I had some questions here in mind, and you kind of already hitting on the second one. In your opinion, does the media in general have to mention Jesus or the gospel explicitly for you to consider it Christian?
No, no, I don't.
Okay.
I don't think so. Again, this goes back to like I guess I would be in the camp of saying like, you know, even though it's not a explicitly Christian studio putting together
Right, right.
something, if the content is in line with basically morals, beliefs, kind of,
Yeah.
in line with
Yeah.
scripture, then I would say, hey, well, welcome.
Yeah. Yeah,
you
and I
know,
would say that in general, I would probably generally agree with that. Like, I don't think it necessarily always has to be overt or explicitly mention Jesus. However, let me do go back a little bit to the worship music topic because I do have a bone to pick with some worship music, and here's why. And first of all, let me just start off by saying when it comes to worship music, like I love worship music. I think like for me, if I went to a church that did like 50 minutes of worship and 10 minutes of preaching, that would be my church because I'm one of those people who like I really get into it and I really enjoy it. And there's just something about the live music and like worshiping like with other believers that really like does something for me. And in my opinion, like the whole worship part of service is meant to kind of prepare your heart for the message. And so like I don't think it's right for people to come in late. I want to get there early. I don't want to miss any part of it. I don't want to be distracted. I want it to just soak in and then prepare me for the message. However, I will say that there are lots of Christian songs that are not worship songs that are played during worship time. And that's kind of a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. And I can't give you any examples that off the top of my head. And even if I could think of them, I don't know if I'd want to call them out here. But not everything that plays on the Christian radio station is a worship song. So they shouldn't all be sung during worship time, in my opinion.
I got you. So you would heavily distinguish praise versus worship, right? Like I
Well, I mean,
and
not
I would
not necessarily. I would kinda lump praise and worship together, but I would say there's some Christian songs that play on the radio that's more talking about a person and their individual walk with God and their faith more than praising or worshiping the Father.
yeah, well, like, and I guess I would separate them because it's like, if you're praising God for what He's done in your life, if it's one of those songs like, um, I guess more where it's kind of you're involving yourself. It's not necessarily just worshiping God, like this is all dedicated specifically to you, but just kind of just talking about God in a more general sense of like, hey, look, I've seen you do this and I've seen you do that. It's not just like,
Yeah.
Lord, I love you. Here I am. I'm
Well,
surrendered, kind of thing.
Well, like Amazing Grace, in my opinion, is a praise song. Like you're praising God for saving you. Like this is what you've done for me. You saved a wretch like me, right? I was lost. Now I'm found. You have saved me, right? Like it's to me, that's a praise of God and a worship of God. But to me, it's more focused on praise. But
Well,
there's some songs that I just feel like they're very catchy, they're poppy, and they're not necessarily praise or worship, but they do play on Christian channels, and so they end up being sung in church.
I can get that, and I want to say two things here. So, first one would be a couple episodes back. I remember you brought up a Tree 63 song, and
Yep.
but and you had
Look
tried
what
to,
you've done for me. What could I do for you?
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So
Which is a great song. I love.
but yeah, so I went and listened to it because I was like, man, I don't remember like the melody you had sung it to, but I was like, okay, now, I
Yeah,
mean,
I
yeah,
can't sing. Yeah.
no, no, well, it wasn't even that. It was just think it was like a little bit different cadence that threw me off. But anyways, I love that song, so I
Yeah.
did want to share that with you. But I guess this is not necessarily in line with, and I totally get what you're saying, and I know that there's people that I've talked to that kind of feel the same way. It's like there's a time and a place for different kinds of music and if we're worshiping, let's worship God.
Right.
And I got some more things on that in a second, but I guess kind of to that same point, um songs that kind of do that for me. It's like whenever I stop and think about it, a song that would be framed as a Christian song, and I guess, like you said, not to call anybody out, but there's a Colton Dixon song that I like and my kids like, and it's called "The Devil Is a Liar." You know what I mean? And it's basically the song is just about devil is a liar, says he can give
Well,
you
well,
anything
well,
that
let
you
me jump in
desire.
real quick because that's another pet peeve of mine is I don't want to sing about the devil at
Right.
church. I don't
Well,
want to mention the
no, no,
devil at
no,
all.
I'm not saying that that's played in church, but what I'm saying is that plays on a Christian
Sure,
station,
sure.
and
Yeah,
so what I found was like, I like the song. It's a catchy song, sounds good, but
right.
I'm like, hold up, kind of like I told you before in psychology class. I'm like, we're singing about the devil being a liar, but basically this whole song is dedicated to the devil, and you're a Christian
Well,
artist on a Christian channel singing about how bad the devil is, and it's like, well, you're making him the focal point. I don't care if you're talking
yeah.
bad about him. He's the focal point right now.
Well,
And I was kind of like, hmm,
I'm glad you brought that up because I've kind of just focused more about it, the way it shows up in church services and worship services, because I always kind of get like a lot of times I'll be honest, a lot of times I won't sing those songs when it's any kind of reference to the devil. But I never really thought about it beyond just the worship service and just, as part of like just Christian like pop music in general. But I definitely agree with you. I think that it's, in most cases, maybe not every case, but in most cases, I would say it's probably not a good idea because you are making the devil, the enemy, a focus of your song. Why would you do that when you can make God the focus? And if you want to, at some point in the song mention that the devil's been defeated or death has been defeated, great. But when it's part of the chorus or the name of the song or the theme of the whole song, I think
right, right.
that's when you start to
Yeah,
get off a little bit.
I think there's a huge difference between, singing "The Devil Is a Liar" and it being revolving around that than like that song where, she's like, "The enemy thought he had me, but
Yeah,
Jesus said you were mine." Like, okay,
that's
there's
different.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Like that's a whole different, you know,
That's
tone.
yes, I agree.
So
I agree,
yeah,
and I would sing that, and I would not sing the Colton Dixon song.
right, right, right.
So, I mean, so when it comes to worship, that's my 2 things, like, I think it should be focused on God and worshiping and praising and not focused on just celebration or anything else. That's number 1 for me, and number 2 is I don't really, get any value out of, any song that references the devil that much, like, it has to be very short and subtle for me to even consider singing it. But when it's like overt and it's part of the chorus or just the main theme, I'm not singing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's I guess, might have been just like a little nudge from the Holy Spirit, like, "Hey, I kind of I know what's going on here, but let's just be more mindful." Like
Right. Right.
you spent the last 3 minutes singing about the devil and what he does and
Well,
who he is and how he moves, and
and
you know,
just the same way we were just talking about Lifehouse, right? Like we both are fans of Lifehouse. However, I wouldn't want to sing Lifehouse like in church service, in my worship service.
I think
Like
there was
even
maybe
I,
one song that you could classify as like a more very, deep
I
worship.
mean, I think there's some deep ones that are obviously worship, but because of the fact that they never explicitly or overtly say the name of Jesus or
I
mention
got you.
God, I wouldn't want to make them on the, part of the worship rotation. That's all I'm saying.
I got you.
Like
Okay,
like I may drive in my car and listen to it and feel like I enter into like a state of worship, but I wouldn't want my band at church to play them is all I'm saying.
I got you. And going back to that, I think it's just one of those things, right, where you're just kind of like you're with the church body, right? And the spirit starts moving. And I think you feel that like just, it's like you feel your spirit is heightened in that moment.
Right,
And
right.
the people around you spirit is heightened. And I think there's just like this cool flow of like everybody feeling like this, like we are the body. And I think that that's kind of what gets you there. And why those moments just feels kind of just extra like surreal and just honed
And
in.
there's a power to live music, man. There really is. Like there is a power to music, and I think it's undeniable that there's that saying that music could tame the savage beast or whatever. And I think there's definitely an element of that the right music could bring out like the worship side of you, and other music could bring out like an animal side of you.
That's the second episode that you've referenced that, so we're gonna have to fact check that quote to make sure that it's right. Because I don't know, I know I kind of feel like I
I don't
there's
remember
something
saying
like
that before. When did I
yeah,
say that?
listen, we already know I watch our episodes back. I've heard you say it, but no, each time you've said it though, this is only the second time, but I'm like, man, I know what he's talking about. There's a quote, something like that.
Well,
I don't know
what's
if
the
that's
quote? Now I
necessarily.
got to look it up
I
because
don't know
now
if
I
that's
need to know.
necessarily it or not, but yeah. Yeah, man, and it is awesome, man. I do, and I mean, obviously, there's something to it, which is why all these concerts, you got hundreds of thousands of people in these arenas, because I think there's something about that communal bond of singing, together, and obviously, on the other side of the spectrum, I mean, there's some pretty crazy. examples of some of these demonic concerts that kind of go down these
Right,
days.
right.
It's wild. It's
Okay,
wild.
just to fact check myself, the quote that I got here off of AI says the quote is music has charms to soothe a savage beast, often misquoted as soothe the savage beast. I don't know. So I
Wow.
don't know. Anyway,
I
let's
I I
let
I thought it was something like music soothes the soul or something, but I don't know.
no man, it's the beast, dude.
All right,
It's
yeah.
definitely the beast. That's
I
yeah.
thought we were not making the beat
But
the
hey,
focal
we're just
point.
two regular guys
Oh,
here.
yeah.
We don't have any kind of degrees or
Hey, the
doctrinal like
hey, you know what's
qualifications. So
good? Listen, ladies and gentlemen,
disclaimer.
he made it into at least 30 minutes of the episode before getting there, so I think we're making progress.
Yeah. Just disclaimer out there, you can't take anything we say with more than a grain of salt because apparently even our ability to quote just popular opinions is flawed. So
Hey,
but I do want to pivot to movies because I think when it comes to movies, we've had a few conversations briefly, and I know we disagree on at least one movie and at
yeah,
least one TV series. And so
okay.
I want to talk quickly about Nefarious, and then I do want to
Nefarious,
talk
man.
about the what's the popular TV show everyone's been
The
watching, The
Chosen?
Chosen.
Oh,
Yeah, I want to talk about those two because I think we disagree on those two, and then any other movies or TV shows that you want to bring up, but let's start with Nefarious because that's most recent. I know you said you watched it and you have
yes.
some
I
opinions.
I I would recommend that anybody watching this go watch Nefarious, man. I listen, I and don't I'm not gonna hype it up because I think that that's what happened ended up being your problem was it was kind of hyped up. To me, I just kind of stumbled across it. Matter of fact, I want to say it
Yeah,
was maybe like Pastor Mark Driscoll sat down with the guy who made it. And so I checked it out, man. For the
that's why I checked it out too because I heard an interview with the guy who made it, and it sounded like a good movie. Sounded like a different type of Christian movie than what I've typically seen. But tell me what you liked about it.
man, I just I guess it was one of those things because it wasn't I didn't necessarily think it was framed as a Christian movie. I felt like it
Mm.
had Christian themes as I was watching it, and I think that it just for the person who doesn't necessarily like I think kind of similar to what you were saying in reference to this music. Like I think a person who was just trying to watch um a horror movie, which is I think how they kind of framed it as far as I remember, got a realistic. I mean, granted, yeah, it wasn't the biggest budget or whatever, but I think that they got a message that I think was important and valuable. You know what I mean? Like that's what the other side looks like, man, and it's real. It's a real thing, and that's scary enough. It doesn't have to be gory or whatever. It's
Hey, friends, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. And I just want to take a minute to tell you about my book, Everyday Lead. So, if you haven't already purchased the book, it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. And if you have already purchased the book, then thank you so much for your support. Please leave me a review, it helps out a lot. If you're wondering what it's about, well, I'll just tell you I have 25 years of working in aerospace manufacturing, leading lean transformation, continuous improvement, and Six Sigma projects. And I've tried to take all that knowledge and experience and simplify it so that the average person with no manufacturing experience would not only understand the concepts, but would also be able to apply some very simple tools to their own processes to help eliminate waste. So it doesn't matter whether you're baking a cake or whether you are a nurse or a doctor working in the medical field, or you are an accountant or an attorney. Anywhere there is a process, there is going to be waste. And I'm not talking about rubbish. I'm not talking about things that are left over. I'm talking about defects, overproduction, waiting, non utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, excess processing. This simple book, and as you guys can see, it's a very short read here. You can probably get through it in just a couple hours. Basically will help you to understand what that waste looks like in your process and give you some basic guidelines on how to eliminate it. So thank you for your time. I hope you check out the book and enjoy the rest of the show.
some
So
real things.
I'm glad you said what you just said because you're highlighting one of my problems that I have in general with Christian movies is that they prioritize the message over the storytelling. And that is my primary qualm with almost every Christian movie that I dislike is they prioritize the message. They want to get the gospel out there and they focus on that so much that they don't do a good job of telling a story. And we've all seen movies where there was an agenda behind it, whether it was, the new woke stuff that they've been pushing in movies
My
recently
goodness.
or some other political environmental agenda, and we hate
Yeah.
those movies, right? we
Yeah,
we watch
absolutely.
those movies and we're like, oh, it's so gross because it could
Hey,
have been a good movie, but they spent the whole time pushing this agenda. And honestly, even as a Christian, I feel the same way about most Christian movies. I feel like they focus so much on pushing that story or on pushing or telling that message that they don't do a good job of telling the story. And that's kind of how I felt about Nefarious, to be honest with you. And let me just say this, first of all, disclaimer, Boondock Saints, one of my all-time favorite movies.
and that's why I
And
watched it. I'm like, he's in there.
right. So the guy who's possessed by the demon in the show is like the older brother from the Boondock Saints, right? The older, less popular brother, because his younger brother was
Norman
Norman
Reedus.
Reedus, who was in The Walking Dead, right? So
Yeah,
he's
blew up.
he's blown up. He's blown
Yeah.
up as a megastar. But the older brother from that movie, just like most older brothers, kind of got forgotten and passed over
Well,
because
and look,
the
that's
younger brothers come along and get all the attention.
well, that's literally why because I saw that guy and I'm like, Boondock Saints is it resonates with you and I, very, very much. Um,
Yeah.
and so I was like, man, I'm definitely interested. And maybe I went into it with kind of that on my heart too, like thinking about, oh, well, this connection between you and I kind of things. But yeah, man. And so, man, that's, I mean, you
But
just
let me just say again, I went in wanting to like that movie because I like that actor, because I saw an interview with the director and I liked what he had to say about it. And I just went in thinking, okay, this is going to be a different kind of Christian movie. And I will be honest with you, I watched about maybe 20 minutes of it and we turned it off because I was just like, it just seems so unrealistic to me. I mean, just the dialogue between the two main characters, I just felt like this is not how a demon possessed person would really talk. It
well,
just felt cheesy. It felt
and I
like there was, like, an obvious message they were trying to get across, and it turned me off.
And no, see, I totally agree in that aspect. Excuse me, disagree in that aspect. Because I think that we've got so accustomed, from growing up with movies like The Exorcist, and especially as of lately, all the movies with the Warrens, like the Conjuring movies, like it's very, very in your face graphic demon possession, and realistically, uh, I believe in alignment with like Pastor Mark Driscoll, who's preached on, new days, old demons kind of thing, where, you see these same characteristics over different periods of time all over the world where these same kind of things kind of manifest themselves.
Sure,
And
sure.
so I would say like, you know, we think of demon possession as like, head spinning, throwing up green vomit. But I think that people who are walking around with demons whispering in their ears that end up killing themselves or being bad off on drugs or what have you, I think that those things do manifest themselves a little bit more subtly. I
Well,
do.
I agree, but I don't know, maybe it was just the portrayal. Maybe it was a good actor with a bad performance because just the way he talked and just like he came across with this air of like superiority, like almost everything he said, he was stupid to have to communicate with such a lowly life form as the lawyer that he was talking to. I don't know. It was just maybe it was the performance itself that I just was, not
Yeah, I got
vibing with. But I would say this, I would say that I've never been a horror movie fan. Like, I don't watch any of those movies, even The Exorcist, I've never seen the whole movie, but I will say, like, if you wanna talk just, like, suspense and creating, like, that, like, suspenseful feeling, I think M. Night Shyamalan's movies do a way better job than that movie did. And his movies don't have a lot of gore or, like, a lot of, like, a lot of the typical horror elements. They're just,
right,
like, they create this atmosphere of, like, uncertainty and suspense we talked about previously, like, this movie, The Sixth Sense, for example. That's a good example where it's like there's not like a lot of like gore or like, a lot of violence or anything like that, but it just creates this like feeling of suspensefulness the whole time. And I think that's kind of what they were going for. It
yeah.
just didn't do it for me.
And see, yeah, M Night's very, very good at building up to reveal the dumbest point ever. So I mean, like his
Right.
movies
He's the
throughout it,
opposite, right?
yeah,
He's the opposite. He's the guy
yeah.
who's like wanting to
He
tell a good story,
and then
right?
just lets you down at the end. Yeah.
However, since we're on that topic, I think in the movie Signs, he actually did do a good job of storytelling with a good message because that's a story about faith. I mean, it's all about a guy who was, I think he was a priest or a pastor or some sort. He was some sort of pastor who lost his faith when he lost his wife, right? And then in the moment, yeah, it's about aliens invading and all this, but in the moment, he remembers things that his wife told him as she was dying that
Swing
ends
away,
up saving them, right?
swing away.
Swing Away was one of them, right? Swing
Uh,
Away, forgot the guy's name
yeah.
in the movie,
Was it
but
Mel
yeah.
Gibson? Was it not Mel Gibson? That wasn't. I don't
No,
know.
no, she said Swing Away something, the kid's name. It was the
Oh,
the guy played by Joaquin Phoenix, his character. Yeah, I forget his character's name, but she said Swing Away Chuck or whatever his name
but
was.
no. I guess getting back on track to what you said about your pet peeve with Christian movies. Eh, I would say that I could understand and see your point because I think that a lot of times we do that with each other. Like you know. eh, Uh, we try to share our faith and share the gospel, and sometimes we think that in order to do that, we have to be overly pushy, like, "Hey, do you know about Jesus? Do you love
Yes,
Jesus? Have you met Jesus?"
great point. Yep,
And sometimes I think that it's best to take the same approach that Jesus took with us, which is meet them where they are, right? Like just you could be preaching to them by just loving on them. Hey man, how's it going? What kind of things are you into? And I've seen the fruits of those things. Like I've seen people who are very standoffish because they're like, man, you're one of them Christians, y'all are this, that, the other. And I'm like, man, I can talk to you on your level. You know what I mean? And ultimately, don't they say actions speak louder than words? Well, let me
right,
let
right.
me exhibit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The characteristics and traits of the person that I love and serve and call Jesus Christ my Lord and Savior. But I don't got to start throwing Jesus at you off the bat, and you're just like, man, I don't want to hear it. You know what I mean? In my
You know,
opinion,
Yeah, and I'm with you there, and I'm not trying to be judgmental about other Christians who do,
no,
are very pushy or very overt, and like every time you ask them like how their day is, oh, I'm having this blessed day. Like, okay, like I think that sometimes people, in my opinion, could be a little bit, they come on a little bit too strong. But I'm not here to judge anybody, you know what I mean? But I get what you're saying, and I feel like it's very similar with the movies, because I'm just gonna throw it out there now. I think there's a lot of Christian movies that I just can't stand because they focus too much on the message. Whereas there's a lot of quote unquote secular movies that I think have an even stronger message about faith, and about salvation and about God than a lot of the Christian movies do. And they're reaching a lot more people because they're focusing on the storytelling. And I've already mentioned one. I do think Signs, in all honesty, is one of those movies that has a better message about faith, even though it's based in sci-fi and not in, coming from a Christian studio. I think the Book of Eli is another one.
right,
Even though
yeah,
there is some violence and some stuff in there that it's not for everybody, the overall message is a message about faith. You got a guy who's protecting the Bible and trying to, reintroduce the Word of God into a fallen post-apocalyptic world, who
right.
only survives for like 40 years because he, believes in the words of this book.
Yeah, because of his faith from before. And also, on the flip side of that, you have another guy who's trying to use the word of God because he understands its power, like
Right.
the devil, but
To control people.
wants to use it for evil. So, that
Yeah.
that is a great movie, man. And um that movie makes me think about the time period, right? So after tribulation, right?
Mhm.
Um Tribulation happens, it's going to devastate this planet, and then there's going to be 1,000 years of peace, but there's going to be like basically the ruins, and people are still going to be able to sin and all this stuff. And it's like I can see it like kind of taking place in that time where like civilization has been wiped out, all the church has been raptured away, and there's been this big cataclysmic just event. Like, so yeah, Book of Eli is legit. It does have some
Yeah.
stuff that would kind of
Not
maybe
suitable for all audiences,
right, but
but
and I would say that in the same way, like we said, not picking on any brothers and sisters in Christ who go out there and or just like, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. I think that there's both are necessary. And I think that God calls different people to different positions for different reasons, obviously,
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
a fully functional body. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that there's a time and place for people like that. And I think that there's a time and place for other people who can just kind of, go out there
Yeah.
and, I
Just
guess
not for
be a
me.
little.
That's all I'm saying. Not
Right,
for
right,
me.
right, right. Yeah,
But I will say, let me throw out a couple more movies that I think are along the same vein as like the Book of Eli. So I think the Shawshank Redemption, I think that's a story as well that has a lot of faith built into it. And I also think The Count of Monte Cristo, which is one of my favorite books and the favorite
favorite, yeah.
movies of all time. It's about like, this guy who's struggling with like, should he like give in to like his anger and his feelings of revenge, or should he trust in God to let, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, and let God handle it and let him forgive and move past and heal and focus more on love than on revenge. Like I think like those are both really good movies that have really good faith-based messages in them, even though they weren't made by Christian studios, they weren't made by Christians for Christians, and even some of the people in them are so far from being Christians. I mean, obviously, with Passion of the Christ, Jim Caviezel was in Passion of the Christ. He's a strong Christian. He was also in um, Count of Monte Cristo. But then you got other folks like in the Shawshank Redemption that I don't know where they are with their faith, but
Yeah.
they still manage to tell a good story that has a lot of faith components in it.
Man, one movie that really kind of caught me off guard, and I was like, man, like it. I guess maybe because I wasn't going into it with, I don't know, thinking that, oh, this is gonna be a Christian movie. I don't know what it was, or anyways, uh, the movie about George Foreman, the life of George Foreman. Like I think it's
I haven't
called
seen that one yet.
I think it's just called Foreman, and I'm like, cool, man. I like George Foreman. He was a great boxer, blah blah blah. And like, man, it's crazy because it does tell his story, but then it also tells about how he died, and then he came back to life basically, and gave his life to God. And I was like, whoa, I didn't even know this side of
Wow.
George Foreman. Like, I knew he boxed and I knew he sold grills. I didn't know like he became a pastor and all kinds of stuff. But it was a really good movie, man, in my opinion. And so in the same lane as what you're talking about, the movie that comes to mind, and I mean, granted, it's a stretch, but I know it was intentionally done. I like this, but I remember, man, this was years and years ago. Now this was probably pushing like, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. Um, I remember telling you, I'm like, man, I just watched this movie, and you're like, what was it? I was like, this movie Mother. And I was like, but dude, it was crazy. I said, dude, I watched the whole movie. I said, I don't even know what was going on. And you were like, well, what was it about? And so I started telling you, and then I realized like it's the story of the Bible. So it's got Jennifer Lawrence in it, and that
Hmm.
um
I don't think
that
I've
that
ever seen it.
no, you I don't think you have, but I remember telling you about it. Um
Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um so I'm trying to think. Anyways, yeah, I know it's got Jennifer Lawrence in it. I can't remember the big dark guy's name in it, but yeah, man, it's basically, it starts off with, these people that show up. I think Michelle Pfeiffer's in there, and her and this guy's basically representing Adam and Eve. But anyways, it just follows this like story arc of like biblical things. And the crazy thing was, I sat there and I watched it, trying to figure out like, what is this movie about? What's going on? And it wasn't until I was basically like explaining to you what happened in the movie that I started wait, that sounded like Adam and Eve. Wait, that sounded like Cain and Abel. Wait, that sounded like, this, that, the other. So
Hmm.
yeah, it
So
was
was it
kind of.
more of a parody or what?
No,
I mean,
no. Um,
how would
I
you describe it? I mean, were they actually trying to
yeah, yeah,
like
there.
give validity to the Bible or
Yes.
retell it in? I don't know.
So how I think the guy's name is Javier Boredom or something like that. Um, and basically he is supposed to represent God in the movie. According to like, I went and like after I had this conversation with you, and I was like, man, I see uh this. I basically kind of see how this lines up with the Bible. Um, I went and looked it up, and they did this on purpose. So, like I said, so
Yeah.
Javier Bardem, or however you say his name, is basically supposed to be God, and Jennifer Lawrence is Mother Earth, and like I said, the Michelle Pfeiffer character is Eve, and I can't remember the guy that he's pretty well known also. Ed Harris. he's like Adam, and then yeah, it's just like, I mean, if you watch it like with that in mind, you're like, oh, I see what they did here. And I mean, it gets a little bit out of control because, like, according to the person who made it, like I said, Jennifer Lawrence is supposed to be Mother Earth, and then at the end, she like burns the house down that is supposed to, I guess, represent the world, with oil, showing that the world is, that we're killing the world with oil, or some crazy thing. It got a little bit,
Sounds
sideways
like it
towards the
gets,
end.
yeah.
But
Well, that you know what that reminds me of when you're talking about that, it reminds me of The Matrix, because The Matrix, you got Neo, who is obviously a Christ figure,
yeah,
and he dies to save everybody in the third movie.
right.
However, even though you have this like overt comparison to Jesus, I wouldn't call that a faith movie. I wouldn't call that a
No.
Christian movie. I wouldn't say it's like a wholesome. It's okay. I mean, it's an entertaining movie. I'm not hating on the Matrix. I like the Matrix, but like if I was gonna look for a movie that had a strong message that I want to share, with my kids, for example, I would go to like the Book of Eli over the Matrix, even though the Matrix has this very clear parallel between Neo and Christ.
Oh yeah, and absolutely. I mean, they incorporate things on purpose, which I believe like this other movie did. But like the Nebuchadnezzar, and you know what I mean,
Yeah,
is the name of the
there's
ship. And
lots of like symbolism and like borrowed names and phrases, and
right,
they
right,
repeat a lot of themes from the Bible, even
absolutely.
though, like I said, in my opinion, it's not like a Christian movie or even a faith movie that I'd want to share, with anybody who, I'd want to, advise they watch it if they're looking for a good, message. Like I said, nothing wrong with it, entertaining movie, but I would rather watch that than God's Not Dead. I'd rather watch that than The Chosen. I'd rather watch that than most of the popular Christian movies that I've watched in the last decade. But
Yeah,
I'll watch them one time and get the message, and most of the time I walk away feeling like, hey, that was just too cheesy, and they focus too much on preaching at people versus telling a good story.
yeah, and I mean, again, I do believe that there's you know an audience for things that
Yeah.
are a little bit more preachy, and I do believe that there is a space for it, and I do think it's good to have. I can understand just saying, hey, look, that's not necessarily for me. But
So let's talk about The Chosen, because I know you like The Chosen.
So I do like The Chosen. There's still some things that I don't really like about The Chosen, and I will say I'll go ahead and lump that in with The House of David. I like The House of David as a series. I I for me, what it is I enjoy like watching, being able to see the Bible come to life. These stories
Visualize it.
that,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
these stories that I've just basically had in my head. I like seeing those things. What I don't like, again, is like I said, whenever, like the biggest ones that I can remember that they did was Noah's Ark with Russell Crowe, and
Mhm.
that was terrible. They didn't. It's not biblical. Um, and
Well, when
and
you
they
say
did
it's
it
not biblical, they changed a big part of the story,
100%.
right?
They've
Yeah.
changed a bunch of big parts of the story, but I mean, I'd say it's not. Okay, I'll say it's not biblically accurate. That's a better
Yeah.
way of
I mean,
putting it.
I'll be honest with you. I did like a lot of things about Noah, but I thing I didn't like about it is what you're alluding to. It's the fact that they really changed the whole intent of the flood, and they
Yes.
changed Noah's character from being, somebody who was really faithful to God and, was, aligned with God's mission, which was to wipe out evil, and they made it almost like an environmental movie. Like, hey,
Well,
we got to
and
get
not
rid of
on
people.
yeah, and not even only that, but they had the main antagonist survive on the ark with them. Like,
Mm,
you know what I mean? Like, he
yeah.
snuck on board.
Some of that
Like,
creative license that they take, I like in some movies. Like, I'll be honest, in The Prince of Egypt, they take a lot of creative license, and I loved it.
well,
But
no,
in Noah, I didn't. I didn't
and
like it.
and I'll say that, like, I can agree with that. Like, if they have to take a creative license, like, so one of the things in the House of David, right? So King Saul's wife is like, they mention her name, so they had to, like, well, he obviously has a queen, so they took some creative licenses with that and just kind of incorporated her in a way that didn't really affect whether or not it was biblical or not, for the most part. But like stuff that they did where they're like, they gave David a sister called Ava. It's like, so, well, she might have, but that's not mentioned in the Bible. We don't know. And then like he keeps referring to himself as a bastard, and it's like, well, thinking that David's father was with his mother, and then she died, and I'm like, that's not all things in the Bible. And it's like, so it's like, to me, I can understand whenever there's not enough, like, there to kind of go one way or the other. But whenever there's facts that are being skewed or left out or changed, and I'm like, like, man, just, you're doing this for the purpose of your faith. Like, I'm sure these
Right,
people
right.
who are making these want to see their faith come alive also. And so it's like, man, just kind of, let's stay within the scriptures, I guess, for me. But I mean, I do, I think that, again, that there's a time and a place for those things, and I do think that it's better than watching some other crap that they put on TV. You know what I mean? But it's just, man, it's like, I guess I kind of feel about it the same way I do about people who, like, go to church because they just think that that's what they're supposed to do, and they listen to a pastor's perspectives and opinions and never get in their Bible, and so it's like they're just taking all these things at face value. So
Mhm.
I guess what I'm getting at is, there are people who would watch The Chosen or watch The House of David or watch this Christian movie, and that's their God experience, and that's all they're ever going to get. You know what I mean? And they take those things like as, okay, well, this is, I mean, if these Christians are making it,
Right,
then
right.
they're making it, accurate. And then it just kind of, it blurs the lines, so
Sure,
to speak.
sure. Yeah, and where I'm coming from is I think, you mentioned a couple times if it's, some people find joy in it or they find good entertainment, then, good on them. I think the opposite is often the case where people assume just because, you're a Christian, you automatically are gonna like something like The Chosen. Like, and trust me, like The Chosen is a show I wanted to like a lot. Like I think I watched most of season one.
Okay.
But my problem with The Chosen is the same problem I have with most Christian movies and TV shows is they focus too much on the message. And even so on this one, it's like they focus a lot on the message more than the storytelling, but also like the storytelling itself is like the creative license they had to take to make what are in a lot of cases very short stories into like entire episodes or themes throughout episodes, to me just wasn't well done, and could have been done a lot better. It's the kind of same problem that I've had with like, a lot of people have issues with like the last couple of seasons of like Game of Thrones because the books were not finished. And so they didn't have this rich content to pull from. So the showrunners had to make stuff up, or like the Hobbit movies, right? So there's one short book called The Hobbit and three very long movies about that same story. And it's like all the filler, all the made up stuff, all the, creative license that they have to take to make one short book into three long movies, to me usually waters it down so much that I just can't, I can't get into it. And that's kind of how I felt about The Chosen. I wanted to like it. I really like the guy who played Jesus. I really like the idea, like you said, of being able to visualize the Bible and see these stories come to life. But for me, a lot of it came across as too watered down or too weakly, portrayed, or just too cheesy
Man,
in
no,
general.
it's funny because I mean, I went into, like, I I wouldn't use the word preachy, but I went into it expecting it to be like that. Like, I basically wanted to see the live Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John books. You know what I mean? Like, and man, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I really liked the way that they did certain things. Like, what really got me was I really liked, you know, um the incorporation of, like, at the end, whenever, I think it's like the first episode, whenever he tells Mary, like, I've called you by name and now you're mine. Cause I'm like, that's right out of the scripture. So it's like, it just kind of, it sold that backstory. Like, when I remember in the first episode, Nicodemus was telling, like, oh, you can't eat fish that was caught on Shabbat. Like, that's, what goes into your body defiles you. And we know that Jesus said it's not, but,
Right,
you
right.
know, it's not what goes
It's
into
not
you
what
that
goes in,
defiles
it's
you,
what
is
comes
what
out.
comes
Yeah,
out, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
so those little things, I was like, man, that I liked those things, and I thought that they were, cleverly done, and I did feel like that Jonathan Rumi did a good job of, like, not being like a a a feminine Jesus. Like I think he was a pretty masculine guy, but at the same, not the most masculine, but I liked the way he his like, there's times whenever he just seems like a guy, but then there's times whenever like he has this way of like conveying these emotions. There's just like in his face that kind of gives you this like Jesus vibe. Like
Yeah.
you get this genuine.
And I'll be honest, I have a different portrayal of him. I think that he does a okay job. I think he's not the most feminine Jesus that we've seen portrayed, but he's closer to the middle, but even a little bit to me, a little bit over that line, over where I would say, the way I picture Jesus. I do picture him being as a compassionate guy, which I think he does do a great job of showing the compassionate side, but I don't see the strength as predominant as I picture when I read the scriptures. And that's one thing that I think is hard. I mean, that's hard for any actor to portray. How do you portray this like tough? Because I mean, Jesus was a man's man. Men followed him for a reason. He was a tough dude who flipped tables and beat people with whips, but he was
Son of a
also the guy who,
carpenter. Yeah.
yeah, son of a carpenter, knew how to work with his hands, but also knew how to cry with people and had compassion for people. And so that's tough to portray. And I think he's done about as good a job as anybody, except for maybe, I mean, my all time favorite
Jim
Jesus is Jim
Caviezel.
Caviezel. I mean, you can't beat Passion of the
Hold up.
Christ.
My favorite all-time Jesus is Jesus. No,
Well,
that's a
okay.
weird statement. Look,
Okay.
my
Yeah.
favorite
Yeah.
all-time
Fair.
Jesus, Jim Caviezel.
But
Is this,
right, but
or
I do
the
want to
real
I do want
Jesus?
to say
Yeah,
this though. I have had, I don't know if you've had the opportunity, but I have had the opportunity of seeing a couple of like plays, like live action, plays of, different biblical stories. And even though they are not, I didn't buy the videos afterwards because they were not something I would ever watch on TV. It's different being there in person. It's different being there live, and that sort of media I can absorb, even though it's very cheesy and overtly, messagey and not as good at storytelling, because it's live action and I'm there and I'm immersed in it. I get a lot more value out of it personally. So I've had the opportunity of seeing, me and the family. We saw a passion play at New Life Church in Colorado Springs. We've got a chance to see a Christmas play in Branson. Maybe one others, live action, dramas, but that I can't think of. But I will say that it is different, and I can absorb that sort of media better just because of the fact that it's live. Hey, friends, I just want to tell you about my book, Everyday Lean. After 25 years of leading continuous improvement projects in the manufacturing world, I came to a simple realization. Lean applies to any process because every process has waste. Whether you're baking a cake, developing software, or building an F-15, the same principles apply. Everyday Lean gives language and structure to what you're likely already doing. It's all about helping people and organizations make their work better every day. Everyday Lean is available now on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles.
yeah, man, and that's understandable. And I guess I know we've kind of been a little bit back and forth, and even in how we feel towards certain things, whether it be music or movies, and I guess to just kind of summarize, I would just say I think that hey, look, to each their own. I do think, like I said, that we all have uh different callings in the way we share, you know, the gospel or the word or our faith in different creative ways, shapes, and forms. And I think that there's places and times for all of them, and I think that they're meant to relate to some people and not to others, because we are all different. But at the same time, I think that similar to our real walks, our everyday walks, man. It's like we live in a pretty dark world. A lot of bad things going on, and you know we still got to find God in the middle of that darkness, and try
Right,
to
right.
shine our lights. And so I think that kind of looking at things with that kind of same mind frame. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is helpful.
Well,
So.
and I think that it's good that you mentioned that, because there's a lot of stories in the Bible that if they were just made into movies without the context of being in the Bible, no one would think they were Christian movies. Like, and I'm thinking like the Song of Solomon's, for example, or like the Valley of the Dry Bones, or like all the endless stories about wars. Like those could have easily been stories taken out of context of the Bible and out of the scriptures, change the names of them, and no one would ever know that they came from the Bible. You know what I mean?
Is 300 not basically the story about Gideon? Original 300? I don't know. Do we know? We don't know.
I
You know
don't
what I
know.
mean?
I exactly.
That
I
that
don't know.
might
I don't know
be
if I would go that far, but I would just say that it's worth mentioning that because because there's this question. So if I asked you the question, can a movie be made by non Christians and still communicate a Christian truth?
absolutely.
I would say yes. I would say we've given a few examples of movies that do just that.
Well,
Right.
and not only that, I do fully believe that, and obviously the verse that sticks out in my mind the most is, whenever I've mentioned this before, but whenever Jesus says, many are going to come to me on that day and said, Lord, we did all these things in your name. We cast out demons, we perform miracles, and he doesn't deny that they did those things, right? But he just says, depart from me, I never knew you. And,
Never
and,
knew
and
you.
so and so what that tells me is that God cared about the person receiving the blessing or getting the demon cast out enough to use a broken vessel to reach them. And I think that that's the same thing that could happen in the media space. And I guess on the flip side of that coin, um, I can see how what you would consider watered down, very pushy, overly over the top, like, you know, preachy, um, media, which I guess, I believe is good for some households, but also kind of turn people away from God. And so I do think that, again, that there needs to be those kind of little undertones or those subtle books of Eli where you get the takeaway from it is like, man, faith, maybe there is something to this faith, you know what I mean? Because I look at this guy
I,
and
yeah.
I could relate to him, but he had this faith element, and maybe that's what's missing, you know what I mean?
Right,
So
right.
yeah,
Well, I mean, we what we read in the New Testament is we started off with Jesus and we ended with Paul. We started off with the last Old Testament prophet coming and telling people the bar is actually way up here and we all fall short of it. And then we end with Paul basically saying, guys, what that means for us today in this new covenant is we have grace and
amen.
we have freedom. And it's like it's the same way. Like we wouldn't go up to a non-believer and just say, hey, you have grace. Like, if you just believe in Jesus, you can go do whatever you want. No, we want them to understand first that they're a sinner and that they need to be born again. They need to be raised to life. And we'll stop there until they receive Christ. And then we'll teach them about the gospel. And then we'll teach them the truth about how to walk in faith. It's kind of the same with the media, right? Like I would never play a movie like God's Not Dead to a non-believer and say, okay, there you go. Check out this movie. How could you
Yeah,
not be a Christian now?
this
Right.
would
But I would,
adequately represent my faith. This would
right,
this would
right.
get me done. Like,
But
no,
I but I
you
but
really,
I could see someone watching a movie like The Book of Eli and then walking away with some questions like, like that was an interesting movie. Maybe I need to know more.
well,
Um, Go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it's important for us as Christians, excuse me, to remember that we weren't always here either. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
Like I mentioned, in the very beginning, like, man, I was bouncing in and out of churches and going to church events, and I just still felt like, yeah, not for me. And so, there's that element, and we got to remember that that's kind of where we came from. Whenever we're sharing, our faith with people. It's like, man, you didn't want to hear it at one point, so you can't just think like you said, hey, look,
Yeah,
go watch Passion of the Christ and The Chosen and whatever, and then you'll get it. It's like, well, no, like, I
yeah.
mean, that those are, I think that there's a time and place, but I don't think that this is necessarily it. You know what I mean? So
Right. So let me just summarize my thoughts, and then I'll let you do the same, and then I think we'll wrap it up here, brother. Because I would say that what I'm going to say mostly applies to most quote unquote Christian movies and TV shows. But my general takeaway from most of them is they do prioritize the message over the storytelling. They come across to me as too preachy. The characters, I feel like in most cases, are too unrealistic. They don't show real flawed people that are really struggling the way we really do. It's either they're completely evil or they're completely like flawlessly Christian. I think a lot of the movies, they avoid like real darkness. They kind of flirt with like evil, but they don't show real darkness the way some of like the secular movies do, that really like, make you feel this visceral feeling.
Scare
And
the hell out of you. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Literally.
essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, I do feel like for the most part, there's a lot of good movies with good messages out there that are not made by Christian studios or by Christian, producers, directors, actors, that still have a really good faith message that I would say are equally, if not more so, in alignment with what, I would want to see for a good story that also has a good biblical message. And we've kind of mentioned some of those. So that's kind of where I stand at the end of the day. Again, that mostly applies to movies and music. The music on the, I'm sorry, movies and TV shows. The music, on the other hand, I have less of an issue with in general, because in most cases, as we discussed, they're pretty clear on where they stand, or if they're not very clear, they're kind of, I don't know, a good in between, or you kind of take it or leave it. For me, I mostly take it and and less leave it when it comes to music. Whereas when it comes to the movies and in TV shows, I mostly leave it and take a lot less. So I'm kind of the opposite there. So that's my final thoughts, man. Where are you at?
Yeah, man. I would agree with a lot of that. Ultimately, kind of like I said, man, I can see the both sides, and just to be clear, like, some of the things that we mentioned that we don't necessarily like, that's not hating on them or judging them. That's just our opinions, our takes, likes and our dislikes. So, no, hard feelings or ill will towards any of those things. Just, um, just different taste for different people. But yeah, man, ultimately, like I said, I am, cheesy or not. Sometimes I like the cheesy. You know what I mean? I think that,
You are definitely a much more cheesier. I could tell just
yeah,
by your Facebook post, you're 10 times cheesier than I am.
I, I'm gonna have to go examine my Facebook. But no, I mean, really though, and sometimes I like the cheesiness, but I mean, um, it just depends. But I am encouraged to see more of that kind of content getting out there, and more people taking an interest in it, and hopefully that'll lead to better quality,
Yeah.
more time and attention being put into, you know, doing maybe a better job of adequately representing our Lord in it. But yeah, that's about all I got. That's my 2 cents, brother.
That's your 2 cents? All
Yeah.
right, man. Well, I think we both, got a chance to say where we stand on most Christian media. So with that, I think that does it, for this episode of Walk Talk. So thank y'all all so much for listening. And if you haven't already, please follow the show. And before you go, leave your thoughts in the comments below. God
God
bless.
bless.
Hey, friends, I just want to tell you about my book, Everyday Lean. After 25 years of leading continuous improvement projects in the manufacturing world, I came to a simple realization. Lean applies to any process because every process has waste. Whether you're baking a cake, developing software, or building an F-15, the same principles apply. Everyday Lean gives language and structure to what you're likely already doing. It's all about helping people and organizations make their work better every day. Everyday Lean is available now on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles.